back in Wadi Musa, Jordan, after 25 years. You might not know, if you haven't been to Jordan before, you might not know Wadi Musa by name, but it is the gateway city with all the tourist infrastructure to the famous ruins of Petra. And I first came here in 1998 on a summer abroad while I was backpacking from London to Cairo, and came here to Wadi Musa and Petra, of course, as I was inspired, like many other young people were at the time, by Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which then had come out 9 years before. I'd forgotten almost how steep the hills were here. So now I've been waiting for the rains to clear. It's been raining for about 24 hours. So the sun's not out, but at least it's dry. It's kind of sketchy to walk around here in the rain because everything is so steep. But yeah, I'm gonna try and see if I can remember how to find my way to the treasury. I've been really curious to see how much Wadi Musa and Petra had changed in the last quarter of a century. And they've changed quite a lot in terms of the hordes of tourists, the tourism infrastructure, you know, the visitor center, the QR code to enter the place. But what hasn't changed is the site itself. And here to greet you are the three what are known as jinn blocks, which are these giant carved quasi-cube-like structures that I don't think any archaeologists and historians are certain of what the purpose of these were. Now, jinn is an Arabic term basically meaning spirit. I believe the etymology of genie actually comes from jinn. And these giant solemn blocks, they greet you while you're walking towards the Sikh and the treasury, and they're pretty cool. I remember when I was first here stopping to photograph these, of course on an analog camera with black and white film, and they're beautiful. And I noticed that with all of the tourists that are here, nobody's checking these things out. The treasury and the monastery are too much of a draw, so we'll be going to those now. I love how cool this place is in a literal and figurative sense, all at the same time. Here's one thing I don't recall, is that the ground, or the floor as you would say in UK English, in the Sikh, appears to have been paved. I don't know. The natural beauty of the Sikh, or canyon, is as spellbinding as I remember. Of course, when I came here all those years ago, it was on a very, very hot summer day, and this is a cool, very first day of spring. Much different mood, climactically. I opted not to film any kind of stand-up narration in front of the treasury because it was just so overwhelmed with crowds and touts, and I thought I would just take a quick shot of it and then keep it moving. Something to keep in mind about Petra is that no matter what time of day it is, or what the weather is, or the time of year, the site is so absolutely vast that it doesn't take all that much effort to get away from the crowds. And it's kind of fun just to explore around anyway. I mean, besides the treasury and the monastery, which most people are aware of, there's so much to see here. I am very happy to be back here in Petra after such a long time. But at the same time, I'm going to risk being Captain Obvious and say that I am absolutely flabbergasted by the number of tourists here. Even on a day with such nasty weather, it's been raining most of the day. It looks like a little bit of sunlight's about to creep out. but I cannot believe the number of tourists, the number of touts, the number of tables selling schlock along the pathways here. I mean, it's like walking through the Seek. It's like being in a New York City subway station at rush hour. I mean, it's still great to be here, obviously. And I know I've seen a lot of the famous YouTubers say that you need to be here at 6 a.m., which maybe I'll do that tomorrow, but today it was raining at 6 a.m. So that idea didn't seem terribly inviting. But, you know, if you just go a little bit off the very, very beaten path, like here, you know, I'm just checking out this little area of Nabatean tombs. Yeah, you're not that, you know, you're far enough away from the hordes, but still, it is really, there are a lot of trappings of city life here. There are generators running, and these golf carts are whizzing by, taking elderly tourists around. There's a lot going on at this place in late afternoon. The richness and vibrancy of the colors in the sandstone is just, it's otherworldly. It doesn't even look real. I mean, Petra was definitely more of an adventure back in the day, before all of this, the tourist infrastructure was built, meaning the physical infrastructure as well as the logistic infrastructure. But, you know, you can avoid some of the little bridges and stairwells and things, and you can still kind of scramble around the rocks a bit and do your own thing. There's nobody here really telling you what to do. There's certain places that are fenced off and ladders that are built and that kind of thing, but no one's monitoring you. You can do as you please here, basically. Everyone's mostly just trying to sell you stuff. About to attempt a pretty hefty stair climb, and since I was getting my knee worked on in Amman, I think this will be a little bit of a test. See how it's actually doing. The crowds have mostly left by now, in late afternoon, and all of a sudden the place is starting to feel a lot calmer and more the vibe of what I was looking for. You've got two different types of steps here. You've got steps that were carved by the Nabateans, and then you have proper staircases that were built probably by the Department of Tourism or Antiquities, or an amalgamation of the two. Now, in a sea of red sandstone, you feel like you could almost hear a pin drop. You can hear, there are birds of prey circling above that you can hear squawing and cawing. And now there's a totally open path ahead of me. I'm completely winded and a little bit lost, and I am loving this. This makes it worth it. I forgot how green it is. I guess, you know, I'd been here before in high summer. Everything was mostly parched, but here on the first day of spring, look, spring has sprung at Petra. I mean, I'm being a little dramatic. I'm on a very well-trodden path, so I presume that I'm walking in what is generally the right direction. And here, more stairs. And aside from being an archaeological wonderland, Petra is also just a magic place for raw hiking. Aside from all the treasures that are here from approximately 2,000 years ago or a bit more, it's a great place to come and walk around. It's very rugged. There is, yeah, a minimal amount of infrastructure that's been built. in the last couple of decades. There are stairs and things like that, and they have these ratchet little gift shops that look like they're sort of shanties. But yeah, overall, this is a wicked place just to come and scramble around. I will say it is quite the view from up here. Just hiking around, I found a spot that I didn't know about. There is an obelisk site at the top of these cliffs, and I didn't know that the Nabateans built obelisks. Of course, a lot of ancient civilizations like the Aksumite kingdom in modern Ethiopia and Pharaonic Egypt, they were kind of obsessed with building obelisks. And then you had Europeans who absconded with said obelisks and put them on ships and brought them to the Parises and Romes and Londons of the world. And there looks like another one over here. This one looks closer to a proper obelisk, or perhaps less weathered. It looks like it's carved a bit more precisely. Wow. I'm glad I didn't know about this. It gives you that feeling of discovery almost. I had no idea these were here. So I stayed a bit late up at the obelisks trying to film a juggling bit for a YouTube short, and now I'm leaving Petra almost in the dark, which wouldn't necessarily be that bad, except for that it's been raining and a lot of the rocks are still wet. But there's a part of me that just wouldn't have this any other way if it wasn't difficult in one form or another. Now I'm trundling down these steps that I hiked up, and it's also extra dark. It's more dark than it would be because of the cloud cover. But I also love that I'm here alone. I wonder if anyone will say anything to me when I'm leaving. You know, there don't seem to be, for a place this big and this rugged, there don't seem to be any sort of park rangers or... Well, I found out one way to get a decent Petra photo, which is to bring a real DSLR camera and then wait till everybody's gone and shoot incredibly low light. It's almost completely dark. Day 2 of exploring Petra, and I'm pretty excited actually because today the sun is finally out. It's been raining on and off in large parts of Jordan for a while, and I was hoping for a completely clear day in the 2 days of my Jordan pass to Petra, and I think I've lucked out today. I mean, it's a bit overcast, but it's looking pretty good. And opposite the gin blocks that I explored yesterday are the obelisk tombs, and I've been reading that it is a mistake to refer to the obelisks as obelisks, that they are just in fact a structure meant to possibly denote the family members who were buried in the tomb, that they are totally unrelated to the obelisks in Egypt or Aksumite Ethiopia that I mentioned. But a pretty cool site. And while you're hustling to see the treasury and trying to walk past all the tourists clamoring to get out, note that there are actually a lot of fine details here in the Sikh, such as this carving, which is sort of like an artistic rendering of a very small tomb. There are a lot of really cool details here that if you rush through, you don't notice. That's why you've got to come to Petra more than one day or more than once in a lifetime. There's so much to see. While we may think of Petra as largely a necropolis or a city of the dead, here there is a giant amphitheater that actually predates the Roman period and was enlarged after Emperor Trajan had acquired the kingdom of Nabatea as a tribute state. And this theater shows that Petra is very much a city of the living. This theater could seat thousands of people. And unlike marble or other hard stone theaters that you see in Lebanon and places in other parts of the Roman Empire, including Amman, the Jordanian capital, this is made out of sandstone and it's beautifully weathered. Well, it in fact turns out that there is a bit of an informal Bedouin security apparatus here. I climbed into the theater, and to make that short clip, and a gentleman with a walkie-talkie politely but firmly informed me that it was forbidden to film inside the theater. And that was that. I don't think he was an employee of the kingdom by any means. Maybe there's just sort of a local network of men who provide security in their own. One of the more romantic nicknames for Petra is the Rose City, owing to the rose color of much of the sandstone here. But if you take a closer look, and you don't have to look very hard, you can see some of the sandstone is blue, and there are purples and yellows and whites, and it's just the dynamism of the colors here is absolutely incredible. It's so much fun just exploring the warrens of this place. You can see through this small canyon that there is a temple up that way. See if I can get to it. This is known as the Lion Temple. I gather from there are carved lions, although they're well worn, there are carved lions on either side of the doorway. It's a fairly incredible ruin. And just a note about the rainwater pool that's here. As I was mentioning earlier in my walk, one of the biggest issues in Petra, of course, was water. And the Nabateans, what I suspect, is that they mastered how to capture water, how to channel it, how to use it, how to store it, how to use it for later, and perhaps how to sell it. That's one of my makeshift theories about this place, is that maybe the Nabateans, who, like other early Arabs, had been nomadic pastoralists, but they had settled here in Petra and built this great city. And I'm thinking that maybe it had something to do with, they figured that the sandstone here, although dry, was something that they could mold and shape and cut and use to basically harness rainwater in the way that, today we use solar panel technology to harness the energy from the sun. It could be something like that. And, this place, the reason why it has this little tiny sort of canyonway, I'll call it, like this, is because rainwater or water in general had carved this place out over millions of years. And I think when the Nabateans realized that this place had sort of an inherent functionality that they could exploit, which is that it's quiet and cool and hidden. And Nabatea here in Petra is about midway between the Persian Gulf and Gaza in modern-day Palestine. And I think they figured that this place was a perfect node for a trade route between Arabia and the Levant. I think that the location is kind of ideal. Now I've got to scramble down this thing. I think I'm finally on the final approaches to Adir, the monastery, on Jebel al-Adir, which is the mountain of the monastery that I explained earlier. And my memory isn't serving me that well from coming here back in the day, but I imagine it's not too much further. I feel like I've been climbing for close to an hour. And Petra wasn't just a transshipment point for goods from southern Arabia. It was also a trading post between Africa and Asia more broadly. So you might have lapis lazuli coming from the mines of northeastern Afghanistan. You might have ivory coming from eastern or southern Africa. Besides the spices and the incenses that were coming from Arabia Felix. And so I think, you know, it wasn't just regional. Petra was kind of globalization before globalization. It's at the juncture of two continents, Asia and Africa. And Europe isn't all that far away in the big picture. So I think that is part of what allowed this place to have such lavish construction in the few hundred years that it's known to have existed. And that is also why the Romans wanted a piece of this place. This is why I think, you know, I suspect Emperor Trajan wanted the Nabatean civilization for himself, because he wanted access to this trading post. He wanted access to, you know, all the money that was going back and forth. You know, Rome didn't take this place for no reason. That you can be sure of. A fascinating thing about Nabatean empire and civilization is that for all of these grandiose edifices that they created and left behind, which are here more than 2,000 years later and known like the world round, is the Nabateans didn't really leave much in the way of a written historical record for us to go on to know about what their practices were, exactly who their gods were. And I think most of what's known about Nabatean culture is actually from other societies that they interacted with, the Jews, the Greeks, the Romans, and other trading cultures that intersected with Petra. People who were involved in the trades from Arabia to the Levant and so forth, and north to Syria and Turkey. But it's not really known that much, you know, what their daily lives were like. I read that there's one inscription in a tomb in Hegra, which is also known as Medan Saleh, down in Saudi Arabia, which is the kind of the other Petra, or the hidden Petra, that has recently opened up to tourism, starting I think in late 2019. And so while the Nabateans built such amazing facades, they didn't really write that much about what they did. They don't have any kind of great text that we can read into as far as their history goes. I think that's a really notable thing about them. They left behind these, you know, mausoleums or tombs or, you know, whatever these buildings were. They look, I mean, the monastery here looks to have been inspired by Greek architecture, as far as I can tell, especially the tops of the two sides. And I love how the monastery is broken up by a capital in the middle. This building is absolutely fantastic. The first European who's known to have visited this place over 200 years ago was sort of an eccentric Swiss adventurer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt. And he claimed in his writings, sort of his memoir, I suppose, of his travels, that the Bedouin actually called this place the Castle of the Pharaohs. So the Bedouins definitely were not referring to Petra by any kind of Greek exonym. And so there was definitely, you know, by the time the first Europeans came here with the help of the Bedouins, this site was definitely being referred to by colloquial Arabic names. But today we refer to it as Petra, which is interesting. Also because this is not a site of Hellenistic civilization. This is a site first and foremost of Nabatean civilization, and later it was absorbed into the eastern realm of the Roman Empire. But it was certainly not Hellenic in any way. I mean, I think, you know, one of my ideas is that maybe some ancient Greek chronicler like Strabo or somebody referred to it as Petra, and then maybe classicists, you know, in the 19th or 20th century in the West started referring to it as that. I'm really curious why we call this non-Greek place with a Greek name. I'm annoyingly curious about these sorts of kind of endonymic and linguistic anomalies. You know, what is, because I guarantee you, like, I mean, when you speak to people today in modern Jordan, they refer to it as Petra, but you can tell that that word is not Arabic. You can tell that it's an imported word that has been brought into the language, because that is what it's called, sort of, you know, internationally. It's marketed as Petra, one of the now 7 wonders of the world. But it is certainly, yeah, it is certainly not an outpost of ancient Greek civilization. You know, the Nabateans clashed with the forces of Alexander at one point when he came from Macedon and he wanted to I don't know, conquer this place or raid it or whatever he had intended. He largely failed. And another interesting thing, you know, I was thinking about the last 2 days of hiking around this place, which is arduous in a healthy way, is that I think Petra is a very highly defensible place. I'm thinking of, you know, I've been trying to think about why this is situated where it is, why this site was chosen to erect this grand civilization. And I think part of it, you know, part of the physical geography of this place is that, I mean, just look at the place. It's nothing but rocks and wadis and these pathways, which are now all, you know, made with, you know, semi-modern steps. But there's a lot to be said, I think, for why they built this place where they did. And I think that number one, first and foremost, it was a trading place. Now, the Nabateans weren't known to be a warlike society. In fact, from some of the sources that I've read, which are, you know, based on a lot on Roman sources and Hebraic sources and things like that, of you know, other civilizations that encountered them, whether they were allies, whether they were enemies in the case of the Greeks, whether they were absorbed in the case of the Romans, is that Petra was reportedly for its time, a very egalitarian society, especially with regard to gender roles. Apparently men and women were held with a great degree of equality. And also slavery wasn't meant to be very much of a thing here, which especially for that time is really worth noting. Apparently it is believed there were a modicum of enslaved people in Petra, but they were very minimal. This society was not built, it was not like Pharaonic Egypt, where the monuments were built by, you know, hordes and hordes of slaves that were probably dying to build things like the pyramids. I think, you know, my impression of Petra is that it was a much more fair society until it was, you know, absorbed, or perhaps you could say conquered, by Rome. The history of Petra is both literally and physically shaped by water and the lack thereof. Water is probably the biggest factor in the development of this situation, and perhaps in its demise, however it ended. You can see this canyon here, or wadi in Arabic, was shaped by not millennia, but probably millions of years of water erosion. At this time of day, with sunset quickly approaching, there's hardly anybody left here. There's just a couple of stragglers. These two guys were leaving the monastery when I was, but I just wanted to give the viewers just a little overview of part of the hike and just the majesty of this place. Way off in the distance, you can see some of the royal tombs across this valley here. You can see along that sort of the reddened wall. Too bad that the GoPro doesn't have a zoom capability, at least not now. But this is an amazing view. Petra kind of reminds me, a little bit of Cappadocia in Turkey, if any of your viewers have been there, well, with the fairy chimneys and all that stuff. It's this place it's just absolutely magical. Just these rock formations are out of this world. The later you stay at Petra, the more it pays off. I haven't seen another traveler on this trail for about 20 minutes. And I'm loving the solitude here. It gives you a sense of the place as it was way back in the day before tourist infrastructure was built up that much. Like other ancient sites in this part of the world, I love that Petra has been adapted to modernity with this big rusty garage door, and it kind of blends in with the sandstone. I love that adaptation. It sort of demonstrates that humanity is constantly evolving and adapting, that you can take something old and repurpose it or make it so that it's still relevant to our civilization today. Just in much the same way I've seen just little touches of modernity throughout my 2 days here, like solar panels and little television dish antennas and generators and other things. There are lots of little bits in ways that Petra is more modern, and it certainly didn't have these effects 25 years ago upon my first visit.
Hello.
مساء الخير.
Hello, how are you?
Okay.
Welcome to Jordan.
تمام.
Ma'am,
شكرا. I kind of get the feeling that from what little is known about Nabatean civilization to begin with, we know much more about the rise of Petra than its decline and fall. And I've never read anywhere that Petra had a dramatic collapse in some way, and in the modern sense, when we think of, say, in 2003, 20 years ago now, the fall of Baghdad, or when the Taliban retook Kabul, we say the fall of Kabul. I've never read any specific thing about the fall of Petra. I think that its importance and its regional influence basically kind of organically declined, at some point in the Roman period, after Trajan acquired Petra. And I don't know if Petra was taken without a shot fired per se, but the Romans claimed that they acquired or acquiesced Petra, which made it sound like it was a fairly non-violent takeover, maybe the way the Russian regime in Moscow would term their annexation, quote unquote, of Crimea in 2014. And from some of the things I'm reading about the history of this place, there was definitely a tension in the Roman period when Christianity began to seep south and east into Petra, and some of the Nabateans began to practice Christianity, which was of course frowned upon very much so by pagan Rome. And I think this might have had something to do with the decline of the trade from Arabia Felix, or the south of Arabia, with incense and myrrh and other fragrant commodities that were brought here by land. And there seems to be kind of a pairing of things that happened, which is that in the rise of early Christendom, a lot of the pagan rituals that were, where incense and myrrh were really important, were suddenly no longer important. So I think a lot of the early Christians, they didn't want to imitate any, at least initially, early Christendom didn't want to imitate the pagan rituals that they were kind of rebelling against by adopting Christianity. And so therefore, as Christianity began to spread, the importance of, and when, eventually under Constantine, of course, Christianity would become the state religion of the Roman Empire. So, I think another factor was likely the decline of land routes as seaborne routes became more of a thing, and people realized that you could actually use the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf to perhaps get goods faster than on a camel caravan and going through the Nabatean civilization. So that probably wouldn't surprise me if that had something to do with it. I think, there are probably, a bunch of factors, but I think the end of Petra was more of a whimper than a bang. I don't think there was any dramatic, decisive moment that ended this place. But I do have to just quickly look at this sad, very sad little puppy here. Hold on. Well, you look so sad. You a little sad guy? Oh. I wish I had some snacks for this poor little son of a gun. And anyway, so I think there are, a number of reasons for Petra's decline, and I think it's something that happened probably in a graduated sense over the course of hundreds of years. I mean, when it was absorbed into Rome, I don't think there was any way for it to bounce back, because part of what Petra was it was an independent Nabatean kingdom. And its Nabateanness, for lack of a better term, was its identity. It was at the core of what it was. The Nabateans were, like I said, they were nomads, of the pastoral type, who had settled down, and they had erected this great, complicated city with its, aquifers and cisterns and, all that sort of thing. And over time, it just became a gradually less important place. And I think for Rome, they just didn't feel the need to put that much into it. It wasn't, I think for Emperor Trajan, Petra for him wasn't that big of a prize. I think if the Romans had to fight tooth and nail to gain this place, then maybe they would have put more investment into, its infrastructure and reinforcing its primacy along ancient trade routes. But it seems to me that the Romans basically just kind of let the place go to pot. And the other thing I would add is that I believe at some point in the 4th century, I saw something that there was a absolutely massive earthquake which destroyed, or at least partially destroyed or disabled, a good amount of Petra's water infrastructure. And Petra without water, I've talked about water throughout this episode, but Petra without water is nothing. It's just rocks and sand and, and mausoleums. What else is left without a water system? I mean, water was how the Nabateans sustained themselves over several centuries. And it's part of why Rome wanted this place in the first place. And without that, I think that, it sounds to me like this earthquake was the death knell for this place. But my impression is that Petra was already in decline by the time of the earthquake. And the earthquake kind of just toppled over what was left, and basically the place was abandoned. Just one quick note before I forget from exhaustion upon leaving Petra after day 2 is I was just thinking that when I was here in the summer of 1998, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade had been filmed exactly 10 years before. It was filmed, I believe, in July of 1988, and Spielberg said he thinks they were here for 5 or 6 days. He can't remember exactly. And the film, of course, came out in May of 1989. And I believe I saw it opening weekend in the theater. And I remember the first time I came to Wadi Musa staying in a youth hostel, and there was a mandatory watching of The Last Crusade before, of course, all the backpackers, of which I was one, were going to go to Petra the next day. And I was thinking, wow, you know, back then, that movie had only been filmed here 10 years ago, and the impact it had at the time, because it helped to really put Petra on the map for good or for bad. I think that's for the viewer to decide. And I was kind of thinking about The Last Crusade. Is there's something a little perhaps analogous with the beach and Thailand, actually, because the beach came out, funnily, in 2000, and I was there exactly for the first time 10 years later in 2010. And the beach, and specifically to some personal degree, it seemed Leonardo DiCaprio was blamed for some of the environmental damage that was done in Maya Bay and in the Phi Phi Islands, with all the tourism that the film helped to accelerate tourism in Thailand in a very sort of inorganic way. And it's funny how I was thinking how this film both influenced my life. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was a big part of the reason I wanted to come to the Middle East to begin with. And Petra is the canyon of the crescent moon. If you guys, you probably know that reference. And I'm going to end it there. Thanks for watching, and look out for the next episode. Like, comment, and subscribe if you feel like it.